Okay, so I had a student yesterday, brand new student, new sign up, really good. She's been working on her own using online videos, and we were talking about fills and creating fills. Like a lot of my students, they come in and they say that they don't know what they're doing. To which I say to them, how do you know? Because a lot of times I like to ask my students to kind of give themselves a scale of 1 to 10 rating. Let's say we go through a song and we play a song. All right, how would you rate that performance on a scale of 1 to 10? It helps me to get kind of a handle on what their thinking is about their own playing. I like to kind of get that information because I want to know if my student is kind of confident, not so confident, overconfident, where that whole confidence level lies in their own ability. And it also tells me, how they see their own playing and their potential for getting better and all of that kind of stuff. So I like to kind of ask them what they think. And happily, a lot of times I can say to them, yeah, you know what? I think that's a good rating. Or I'll even bump it up for them if I think that they're kind of underselling their performance. The reason why we do this, or the reason why I do this, is because I want to try to help to give them realistic feedback and like a realistic view of what's going on. Because it's very easy for my students to come in, especially if they've been watching stuff online, and come in comparing themselves to what they're seeing online. Maybe comparing themselves to more accomplished players, people that have been playing longer. Um, and I try to kind of help them to be more realistic about what they're thinking about their own playing, because a lot of times, um, and I have a few students like this, they're way off about their abilities. Like they don't think they're as good as they actually are. And just coming from my experience working with so many students over so many years, um, I think I can realistically tell them, hey, for as long as you've been playing, I think you sound great. Or, um, listen, what you're doing right now is not easy, but you seem to be doing it pretty naturally, or you seem to be pretty comfortable with this concept. You seem to be pretty comfortable with this idea or this figure or this beat or this fill, or you seem to be pretty comfortable figuring out the tempo and the timing of this piece. And just to kind of, like I said, give them more realistic feedback than they might be giving themselves. Because when students come in, they tend to think that they need to be at a certain level within a certain amount of time. Well, I've been playing for a year already, so I should be much better. That's not always the case. And they don't always know. Um, I'm much better equipped to speak to that because of my experience and working with so many students for a long time. A lot of my students are students for a long time, so I could see their progress. Besides the fact that a lot of times it seems to be that the students that work the hardest are the hardest on themselves, which I still don't know why that is, but the students that work the hardest are the hardest on themselves, meaning that, you know, they don't think much of their accomplishments and their practice time and how it has benefited them. Whereas sometimes I'll have students that come in that don't put a lot of practice time in, and they think they're fantastic. So it's a balancing act, and it's how do we how do we kind of set realistic expectations for these students when they come in? Because that's very important. We want students to understand that some things might take a little while, and we want them to understand that other things might come in the snap of your fingers, but some things may take a while. So we have to be patient. We can't get discouraged. I mean, we can get discouraged, but sometimes it's unnecessary to get discouraged because we're getting there, and sometimes we might be on the cusp. I have a couple of students that, boom, have taken off like a shot, because I figured out a way that they learn best and a way that motivates them, as opposed to other students that might take a little longer to get certain concepts. It's all depending on the individual student. And that's why I find this work most fascinating, because we do have to figure out each student individually. You know, like I don't have one method to teach a classroom full of kids because I'm not in that situation. If you are a teacher that has 30 kids in your classroom, you have to decide on a way to approach that classroom and teach them. And then hopefully they all learn. But because people learn differently in all different situations, I have the advantage because I can sit with an individual and I can figure out how they learn best and how they respond best and take that approach. Yes, it's not easy when you have 40 students or sometimes more to keep track of everything. That's why I have to take good notes. That's why I have to make playlists, and I have to, make sure that I am constantly writing down the feedback and the progress and what we've done and what we've talked about. But anyway, getting back to this student, had a really great time evaluating this student. And I think she had a really good time working with me. So one of the things she asked about was fills. And she seemed pretty solid on her beats, and her reading was pretty good because she had studied other instruments before where she was reading music. And so whatever other instrument you're reading music for, the rhythm is the same, the note values are the same. There just might be different things that you'll see along the way, and the notes might be, well, in different places, right? The notes corresponding to the keys on a keyboard are going to be in many different places on the staff, whereas the drum set, far fewer notes to be represented. But still, like I said, note values are the same, rhythms are the same, everything else is the same, time signatures, dynamics, all of that is the same. So she did really well on that, but she said, I don't know how to play fills. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about taking simple ideas and making fills out of them. And I'm going to start off with 16th notes, straight 16ths, where we have 4 16th notes per beat. And the count is 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Okay, and so the first simple part is to just get that figure down. Starting on the snare drum, we'll give you a little forward cam here. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Okay, we could start there, right? We could do a 4-beat fill, playing 4 notes per beat, so that we have a total of 16, and we play 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So how do we make that into a fill? Well, on the surface itself, on the snare drum, it's a fill. We could play a beat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and we could do that. That's simple enough. But once we get comfortable with that, we want to start to make it more interesting. We want to figure out ways to make it more interesting. And I will always say that I love the single stroke roll because it is what we do. We do single stroke rolls all the time. But it's what we do with those rolls. Now that we have all of these different tones and sounds around us and these different options to do with our single stroke rolls, we can start to use the different drums. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. All right, let me lower these toms. These toms seem quite loud. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 and a 4 E and a. Okay, so we can start expanding that simple straight 16th note pattern to different drums. We can then break them up further into 2 notes per drum, still playing the straight 16ths, but changing when we move from drum to drum, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. I like those because we're changing drums sooner with 2 notes each drum. It feels faster. The change in tone makes it more interesting when the tone changes more quickly. But then there is another element. Once we start to do that, and again, we're going to stick with 4-beat fills because we can do 3-beat fills, we can do 2-beat fills, we can do 1-beat fills, we can do half-a-beat fills, any number of those. But to keep it simple, we'll start with the 4-beat fill and use all 4 beats to play fills. We could also use 1/8 notes to play fills, where we can take the tempo of the hi-hat, which is an 1/8 note tempo, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. Right, so the first fill I did was 1/8 notes, slower notes, then 16th notes, but still using groups of 2 around the drums. One of the fun things that I've been messing around with lately, and if you go back a ways, if you are a fan of Led Zeppelin and the legendary John Bonham, you will know that bass drums played a huge part. Bass drum notes played a huge part in John Bonham's playing of fills in particular. Obviously in beats he had a very powerful bass drum, very powerful foot for bass drum, and he did a lot of really cool bass drum patterns using that right foot, doing single bass stuff that was very, very interesting. But what he also did was he mixed his hands and his feet. So I'm going to show you a couple of exercises right now that are going to mix your hands and your feet. We're going to start out on the snare, doing that same 16th note pattern, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to end on the bass drum. So the last 16th note, the last of those 4 notes per beat, is going to be a bass drum note. And I'm going to show you what I mean. First, I'm going to start out on the snare drum with the bass drum ending, and then I'll start to move it around a little bit. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So the which is the last 16th note of the beat, is going to be played on the bass drum. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E. Whoops, we'll start that again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Okay, so I started out on the snare drum with the first 3 16th notes, ended with the bass drum 16th note, and then I started to move it around to different toms, creating something a little more interesting. Okay, ending on the crash with the bass drum at the beginning of the next measure on the 1. So as you can see, we're taking a simple pattern, 16th notes. We're starting out with the hands, 16th notes around the drums. Then we're starting to break it up with a bass drum note at the very end. Then we take that same figure and we move it from drum to drum, playing that bass drum for the final 16th note. And now we're going to break up the drums even more. And this is what I was referring to a little bit earlier, something that John Bonham used a lot, but I'm going to play it slow for you. And as you develop this pattern, you will see how it can be used as a really cool, faster rock fill. So I'll play a beat, and then I'll play this fill like I described. So as you can see, what I'm doing is instead of playing 3 of the 4/16 notes on one drum, followed by the bass drum, I broke up those first 3 notes between different drums. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and like that. So we can start messing around with different combinations of drums and adding the bass drum. And if you start to think about it, we can see a lot of possibilities to expand this idea. This very simple idea, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So without getting too complicated with the count, we can start to change the drums that we're using, change the patterns that we're doing, but still keeping that core idea, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. We can also start, and I'll leave you with this, adding the bass drum to the E and the instead of just the E and the like this. 2 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 4. So now we could start to mess with the bass drum on the first note of the 16th notes, on the third note only, on the first and the third, the second and the fourth, the first and the last. A lot of different things to start expanding, right? And this is how excuse me, this is how we start to create beats. This is how we start to create anything on the drums. Is we pick an idea, we pick a figure, we pick a kernel, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Let's start there. That's the simplest thing that we can do right now if we're starting out and we're new drummers, right? So we take that idea and then we start to apply it in different ways to the drum set. And that is how you can start to build your own creativity, your own ideas, your own thoughts. Hey, I hear this in my head. How can I do that? Do it slow. Start out slow. Keep it slow until you get very comfortable doing these exercises. And then the speed will just actually start to increase on its own the more comfortable we get doing these things. So don't be in a rush to play fast right away. Okay, that's not the goal. The goal is to work out these ideas, find things that we like, and start to slowly increase the tempo, because number one, we want to play it evenly, we want to play it properly, and we want it to sound good. If we start to progress with our speed too quickly and we start to develop a kind of a sloppy approach to it because we're trying to play it too fast, that's not going to sound good. And I will guarantee you, if you start to go down that road and you start to play a little too fast, a little too soon, it's not going to sound even and it's not going to sound good. So we want to keep it in the realm of where we can, the speed at which we can play it the best, right? The most in time, the most evenly. And then when we get good at that, we start to increase the speed slowly. And you'll notice that if you keep bringing that evenness along to each level of speed that you increase, you're going to be very happy with the results. It's going to sound much better. It's going to sound much cleaner. And it's going to sound much, much cooler. And it's going to feel better to play because we've learned to play it very solidly at a comfortable speed before we started to quicken the pace. All right, that's it. Have a great